To me, I feel like classic storytelling and stories that are more of a classic, that type of background that I would teach in high school. I'm a high school teacher too. I love it when they become something else. I'm sure you guys love them too because you're here, right? Besides the authors. So for me, retellings are great. So I'm very happy that we're able to be here with these authors to talk about their stories that relate to retellings. So they will introduce themselves and a little bit about the book without spoilers, obviously. So should we go this way?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. My name is Elizabeth Lynn, and I'm really excited to introduce my next book. This is my adult debut. It's called Fishbone Cinderella, and it's about, thank you. It's about a girl who discovers that she can turn invisible when the Japanese invade her hometown during World War II, and then a generation later, her daughter has to find a way to stop her from disappearing completely. So it's a multi-generational saga with love and war and immigration and a shimmer of magic.
Okay, testing, can you hear me? Okay. My name is Kalynn Bayron. I am a young adult and middle grade author. I am here, what book am I? So I have many books.
Okay, so hold on, I got you. There's many.
Okay,
but
there are a few.
The last one.
I have many books that are kind of fairy tale reimaginings. Yes, and my latest is Make Me a Monster, which is actually a Frankenstein reimagining. I think that I gravitate towards those type of stories because I just love taking something that feels familiar and making it kind of different and new, and also introducing marginalized characters into those settings, because when we talk about classic literature, when we talk about fairy tales, we are often not present if you're Black or queer, and I'm both. So it's nice to kind of have us in those spaces. But Make Me a Monster is the story of a young woman who lives in Ithaca, New York, and she has a very strange ability to be able to bring people back from the dead, and when her boyfriend dies, she does that on accident, and shenanigans ensue. But it really is kind of a story about grief and kind of navigating this magical power that she has.
Hi guys, I'm Danielle Paige. I'm most known for Dorothy Must Die, which was an Oz retelling where another girl lands in Oz and finds that Dorothy is now evil. But my latest book is Spell of the Sinister, and it is a fairy tale, fairy godmother origin story. So it's really fun.
Hi everyone, my name is Jesmeen Kaur Deo. I wish I was smart like Elizabeth and Ryan brought my book, but I didn't. My latest is Reasons We Break, which is a young adult romantic thriller about a teenage mathlete who becomes the bookkeeper for a gang to help her friend pay off his debts to them. But along the way, she kind of gets drunk on power and kind of sets off a gang war. And they have to kind of decide just how much they're willing to sacrifice for each other. So it's got, gang politics and forbidden romance and action, but it's also got a lot of coming of age themes. So it's fun, I think. It's not strictly a retelling, but it definitely evokes a bit of a familiarity with like Romeo and Juliet. It's definitely been compared a lot. So I'm happy to talk about that too.
Hey everyone, I'm Ryan Douglas. I'm the author of The Great Disillusionment of Nick and Jay. This is a Great Gatsby retelling set in the Harlem Renaissance that follows 17-year-old Nick Carrington, who faces an immense tragedy in his hometown of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and is forced to flee to Harlem, where he enrolls in an elite academy called West Egg Academy, and he meets the son of the school's co-founder, who is Jay Gatsby Jr. He comes from wealth and Nick does not, so when their worlds collide, they are basically caught up in a heist, all while Nick is trying to make things more equal for the Black boys at his school. So basically it kind of looks at the glitz and glam of the time while focusing on the realities faced by queer youths in New York City in 1921.
So I'm going to first start with a little lightning round, meaning author question, and then we're just going to have a full conversation with general questions and just bounce off each other. And then obviously, guys, you're gonna get enough time to ask questions because that's why you're here. Thank you so much. So we're gonna start with Ryan. Ryan, The Great Disillusionment of Nick and Jay. So it's definitely representing a classic literary influence, which I've taught, so many people have taught that story. So what made you go, okay, I want to tell this story, I want to say everything about the tales and the characters and kind of spin it into a contemporary way? And maybe you had some challenges throughout the way. Can you kind of talk a little bit about that?
So I really like how Gatsby looks at the American dream and class issues, but I feel like it really kind of overlooks the realities that Black Americans were facing at the time. So I wanted to take, the recipe and make it focus on characters who have been historically overlooked. So it was, of course, a challenge because it's such a classic, and we do study it a lot in 11th grade, or I studied it in 11th grade. So I wasn't a huge fan when I read it, and I really liked Fitzgerald's writing style, and I thought that the way that the main character kind of observed the world and was like a fish out of water around these like elite people was really interesting. So I took those elements and turned it into something that was more focused on people from lower income backgrounds and people who have been historically oppressed, because I think that the combination of parts was good, but it just kind of needed focus. Well, for me, it needed focus for me to be invested on things that felt a little closer to home. So that's why I did it.
That's awesome. And going to Kalynn. For me, I feel like your classic tales not only revisit stories, but they also challenge traditional expectations. These are characters that, yes, there's a background to a story, but they completely divert in a way to teach lessons that might not have been taught in the original story. So what inspired you to have those different types of themes in the book?
Yeah, so I think sometimes those themes just kind of come up very organically, especially when you are, kind of like Ryan was saying, when you are introducing characters from marginalized backgrounds, from historically oppressed and excluded backgrounds. There are those issues about, how we navigate the themes of the story. So in Make Me a Monster, we're really talking about navigating grief and what that means what that looks like when you are, a young Black girl. And so I think that those issues just kind of come up organically, but I really enjoy taking these stories and delving into those deeper issues, because I think that sometimes people think about storytelling and sometimes very surface level, especially when we're talking about fairy tales or things like that. But there are so many, it's such a fun kind of box to play in, a sandbox to play in. There's so many different things that you can explore. And so if I'm writing for young people, and that is most of my work is for young readers, I think it's a really good opportunity to take something that feels familiar and then expand on these issues that all young people are facing. All young people face grief and heartbreak and first loves and first crushes and navigating society as a queer Black girl. Those issues are present there in these kind of familiar stories. So I think it's a good vehicle to talk to young people about issues.
And I agree, because as a high school teacher, I feel like these type of books make you feel taken care of. They're like a safe space. And I just encourage it, because yes, they know these stories, but they also want to get to know themselves, and they want to see these stories with characters that they relate to. And we're living in a world, I'm in South Florida, teaching high school and college, and it's definitely challenging. And you said the right thing, you want to make sure they know that they should be happy with themselves and they should continue to thrive. And these stories are just a great vehicle. So with that said, with Fishbone Cinderella, that's definitely a story as well that is well known, right? What interesting you especially to explore this classic tale and add your Elizabeth Lim spin to it, when it comes to adding those cultural perspectives and those emotional perspectives that come with culture, like all of us have been talking about, pretty much.
Thanks. This is a great question. So Fishbone Cinderella is a very personal story to me for two reasons. It's actually inspired by the Chinese version of Cinderella. So the fishbones relate to a guardian fish that Cinderella's mother sends to Cinderella after she dies. And in this version, Cinderella becomes really good friends with this fish, but her stepmother discovers it and kills the fish and eats it. And all Cinderella has left are the bones, and she finds out that these bones are magical, and she prays to them. And they are the ones that give her the beautiful dress, the golden slippers to go to the festival, rather than a fairy godmother. So there's definitely this connection with the mother. There's the connection of grief and of remembering where she came from. And the other reason I mentioned that this book is so personal to me is actually Fishbone Cinderella is heavily inspired by my grandmother's life. So my grandmother was 5 or 6 years old when her hometown was invaded. And a few years later, she was sent off to Hong Kong to live with her father's concubine, who treated her very poorly. And when I was a kid, she would tell me these stories of what it was like to grow up there and how much she wanted to escape. So eventually, that's how she came to America. It was just to leave this horrible family that she had. And she had so many stories. She was like, my life was really interesting. It would make for a great book. And I don't know, she's 90 years old, so sometimes I don't really know if she understands that I'm an author. Like, she's very sharp. But I don't think she really gets that I publish books. But she was like, you should write about it. It might be interesting. And I was like, okay. So I wrote about it, and I've told her that it's going to be published. And she was like, it's great, okay.
And then Danielle, there's a lot of similar elements when it comes to the type of fairy tale that you are writing about and everything else, but we've talked a lot about the fact that pretty much we're exploring these characters through culture and challenges, and this is a fantasy. And I feel like the way the characters navigate themes that we can relate to is very, very special. So how was that process for you specifically to add those elements to characters that we know have a certain classic background?
I think for me, the story's been with me longer than Dorothy, the fairy godmother one, because Cinderella was maybe the first fairy tale that I remember as a kid, and the first thing that I wrote as a kid was I don't know if you guys did this, but in first grade we got to write a little book, and then they would cover it wallpaper, and then you would take it home, and that's how I decided I went home and I'm going to be a writer, Mom, and she's like, okay, just like your grandmother. But I was so serious about it, and that was my drive. But so for me, I think the story, I wanted to do a fairy godmother story because I wanted to know where she came from, and I love the idea of her coming from actually a place of she loses her mom, and there's a lot of grief, and that's how I connected to the story. So just like Cinderella loses her mom, the fairy godmother loses her mom, and she's a magical person who is part of the sect of other magical people, and every royal has their own basically has their own fairy godmother who tells them what they should do, what they shouldn't do, helps to rule the world basically. And so the fairy godmother, a queen decides that all fairy godmothers should die because she doesn't like her prophecy, and then she has to run away and get revenge. So that's where my story came from.
I love that. And Jesmeen?
I don't know if I did as much of the cultural stuff because it is a fantasy.
Yeah, exactly. But I feel like with fantasies, even if you add I sort of you can relate and you can see yourself in the book no matter what, because the background, your background is something all of us have different backgrounds, and I love reading books and just taking them and saying, okay, how can I make this character something I relate to? That's how I read.
Yeah,
So definitely I read and I go, oh my God, I love this, I love that, I love that the characters are represented a certain way, and I make it my own. And I feel like books like the ones you guys wrote, you can all make it your own and kind of really relate with the themes, which is why I love it. And then with Jesmeen, so Reasons We Break, it's also a very relationship heavy based, and action, adventure, and just all the elements that you added to it are very dramatic. Love it. I love drama.
I thought you said traumatic.
I love drama. Really? Don't spoil it. Dramatic. I love drama. I love drama. So let's see. How do you feel those themes of heartbreak and growth resonated with your story as you were writing it, with these characters that are so pretty much going through so many intense situations?
Yeah, I think, especially when it comes to like a more contemporary setting, I find that the challenge always is, how do we make these stakes feel high, like still heart-pounding, even if it's not a life or death situation, although there are life or death situations in this book. Like I said, it is a bit of a genre blend with coming of age. And, if I compare back to like Romeo and Juliet, which this book is often compared to, of course, that's a tragedy. Sorry to spoil that for anyone in the audience. And it ends tragically, right, with death. And while I would go as far as to say like Reasons We Break is like a happy ending for the most part. There is an element of tragedy at the end of the book, but it's not perhaps in the way that we would expect. And I think that is one of the challenges of writing like a modern kind of reinterpretation is, you have to find a way to make the readers like invest emotionally, so that even like something like, a character's relationship with somebody dying and not like the character themselves dying, or like, the consequences of their actions finally coming to haunt them, is going to be equally impactful to the reader. And so that was an interesting challenge, I think, for me, is like the heartbreak is not necessarily the one that you expect to find at the end of Reasons to Break.
Love it. And now we're going to ask a question that we're just going to all answer. You guys will all answer it together, so more of a general question. So what makes classic stories so adaptable? I think we touched on this already when it comes to characters and themes. Like, you'll teach this in high school and they're like, and then they read they'll read a book that relates to it. I've seen this in my classroom. They're like, oh, I get it. That's really cool. Now it's like reading all of a sudden. So it makes me so happy. They literally asked me, can I read a book? Yes. Please read a book and take away TikToks for one moment. So what makes these stories so adaptable? They just make you bring these stories to different generations with different characters and backgrounds. So Elizabeth?
I think a lot of it, I have like 2 points that, as a writer, from a technical standpoint, I think adapting a tale that's been well known, like a folk tale or a fairy tale, is, since so many people know them already, you don't actually have to go into too much nitty gritty, like explaining. Like, you can kind of just take off with the story and make it your own, especially with the world building. And also, I think with the fairy tales, there's so many themes that are appealing to people. Like in Cinderella, this idea of rags to riches, of having a happily ever after, of suffering under somebody who's mistreating you. These are all themes that are very universal, that people can relate to. And it helps, I think, create characters that you can add more depth to. And because oftentimes the fairy tales are only 1 or 2 pages long, but they're like a good foundation for you to just add richness and add depth.
Definitely.
I look at storytelling as like a very fluid thing. I think that we're always telling and retelling the same types of stories, because they're really, I think at their heart, they're about the human condition. They're about the things that we all kind of experience, relationships and love and loss and grief. Maybe that too. I don't know. That's your thing. It's your business, not mine. But all of those things that just make us, that connect us as human beings. I think so. It's easy to kind of look at those issues and say, okay, well, I can take this and I can make it relevant to my lived experience. But I think that there's just something really, really smart about being able to take a story that people are very, very familiar with, like Cinderella, and tell it in a new way. Because I love it when people go into. I wrote a book called Cinderella is Dead, and we have our Cinderella group here. But people go into it thinking, oh, I know this story. And you get into it and you realize, oh wait, no, I don't know this version of the story. So there's so many different ways to kind of retell these stories. And I think specifically with young readers right now and our literacy issues that we're all talking about and trying to figure out a solution to, sometimes it can be a good in. It can be a good in to say, oh, well, if you like fairy tales, if you like Disney princesses, if you like these versions of the story, let's try something else that's kind of similar, so it's kind of like a hook.
And that's what happens, and I love it.
I agree with you. And I would say that fairy tales for me were they were my first superheroes. They were the first stories that I read that had a female antagonist and protagonist, and they weren't necessarily perfect stories, but women had agency and power. And for me, I think even in my baby brain, I recognized that, and those stories stuck with me. And same Wizard of Oz for that reason, Cinderella for that reason. All of there's just watching these women have magic was so important to me growing up, and then getting to, as a grown up, getting to reimagine it and make it modern and have another generation accept my stories and to be part of kind of this continuum is really lovely.
Yeah, I think I would agree with what's already been said, and I guess the other thing that I would add is just something that Ryan kind of reminded me of when he said that The Great Gatsby was a book that you didn't like, there's parts that you didn't like, right? And it reminds me, because I come from fandom, that's kind of how I got back into original writing. And so when I wrote fan fiction, it was never for a show or movie that was perfect, right? It was never the story that gave me everything I wanted. It was the story that gave me questions. It was a story that was so good, or had the potential to be so good if it just did this. Or it was a question about, well, what happens after, the consequences. And for me, at least, that's what kind of draws me to retellings and classic stories, is that they're not perfect, that they have something that is so good about them that you just feel like there's more to say. And I think that's kind of what brings us back to these stories over and over. It reminds me of one of my friends in fandom. She would be frustrated because she would say that she was like, I spend so much time thinking about these TV shows that are not even that good. But the perfect ones I don't think about, because they satisfy me perfectly, emotionally, spiritually, and then I move on. But these ones that are they have the potential, but it's just not all there, that's what I spend my time on. So.
I think for me, just the fact that The Great Gatsby is so prominent in our culture, not just in classrooms, but in everything. I mean, Gatsby is shorthand for just classy vibes, galas, parties. It's something that is so prominent. So I thought it was worth it to kind of say this belongs to us too. This is also a Black story, and I think that specifically for a historical work, it's worth it to go back to a time like the 1920s, which was actually really vibrant for Black people, and just a time of so much creative expression and so much development culturally, politically, just to show that there was a lot of joy in our history. I think when we think about Black history of that period, just because it's so close to slavery, we always think about tragedy. And so just exploring, Black history through the lens of that sort of glamorous kind of atmosphere gave me an opportunity to really balance that tragedy with something that felt accessible and fun to read. So it was a good challenge for me to, look at the parts of our history that were actually really fun, in addition to emphasizing the struggle.
So perfect, so true. I feel like whenever I see a kid with a book, I was that kid with a book, and my teacher actually let me read in the classroom, and I'm still friends with her, my 9th grade teacher. I was actually texting her today. I have a book on, guys. and that's what I'm trying to talk about. She would give me these type of books, and I was just reading, and it's so exciting to just find that passion. And I say that to my students, just pick a book. I mean, just try, here you go, something that you might like. So with that said, I find comfort in stories, and you guys have spoken a lot about struggles that we face when it comes to our background, our sexuality, grief, just not understand, people that might not understand who we are, and it can be so frustrating because we need to find that safe space, and to me, books can be a safe space. So how do you feel readers can find comfort in your stories? Yes, they have Cinderella, and they have characters that they know about classically, which they pick up the book, but they'll find some comfort, and I feel like we've all lost someone. I recently lost my father, and for me, reading books helps me feel better, and then we relate to those things because we're not alone in losing somebody, or we're not alone in feeling rejected by somebody that does not understand who we are, right? So how do you feel about that? And is there some book that you have found comfort with as well? Teresa. Somebody. I just threw it off.
Still formulating some of this.
Oh, we can just like throw it nice.
So to answer the first part of your question, so when it comes to giving readers like comfort in these like very dark themes, I think for me, part of why I enjoy writing young adult is because you can tackle sometimes some really, really heavy topics in a sometimes like a lighthearted way or in a fun way, right? Like Reasons We Break is ostensibly a gang thriller, right? Like it's got action, romance, all this stuff, but at the core of it, and the reason why I wrote it was actually to talk about the feelings that I think everybody kind of goes through when you realize that the older loved ones in your life are not always going to be there for you, and that you will have to navigate a life without them at some point. And that's like really heavy, right? Especially for like young people, who lose parents or guardians or whatnot. My female main character, Simran, like the reason she actually ends up becoming bookkeeper for a gang is to like distract from her own home problems and like the health stuff that her mom is going through. And I think what makes YA great is that you can like tackle these topics from kind of like an oblique angle. Like it's a little bit fantastical, right? Like a teenager becoming an accountant for a gang. But like at the same time, because it's a little bit elevated from reality, you can find yourself a little bit removed from the heavy material that it tackles, and therefore I think it gives like teens the opportunity to kind of like explore those feelings and get a sense of like how people can navigate that grief and that anticipatory grief without getting too bogged down in the feelings themselves. So that's what I try to do with Reasons We Break, and I think it's one of the great powers of YA in general.
Should I pick?
For me, my book starts with the death of my main character's mom, and I lost my mom maybe a year before I started writing, maybe 6 months before I started writing it. And I don't think I even really processed that was what I was writing. And the character, she gets burned at the stake because she's a witch, or she's called a witch, and the character, her ashes reanimate. So she carries her mom around like actually with her, and her mom like is there, and she pantomimes like things and tells her things and warns her of things, and she has her mom throughout the entire book. And I didn't realize I was writing for myself in that way. I just was so in my own grief, and I hope it helps kids, but it helped me, which was at the time selfishly what I was doing, I guess. And so yeah, I think that books do help us process what we're going through, whether you're writing it or reading it. And also I think that there are books that have helped me, like Joan Didion, Year of Magical Thinking was it's heartbreaking, but I read that after I lost my mom.
So I think that one of the things that I try to do very consciously every time that I write a book is to I write for so many different kinds of readers, but I think I'm writing towards a maybe like 16-year-old version of myself, and other girls who can relate, and I feel like I just want my readers to know that I see them. And that they can be the heroes of their own stories. We don't always need someone to save us. Sometimes we do. I like to see that too. But I think that we can be the heroes of these stories. And I think that when we're talking about, those intersections of, being a queer Black girl, we don't often get to see ourselves. If we're in the story at all, we damn sure don't get to see ourselves as, the hero. And so I want us to be there in those spaces. And so I try really hard to write towards that. And I hope that, someone has picked up one of those stories and said, oh, I can be this thing, at the center of this story, and that you're worthy of that. And there are lots of books that have done that for me. But there's a collection of like essays and speeches by Toni Morrison, The Source of Self-Regard, that has been really helpful to me just throughout my life.
So at the heart, Fishbone Cinderella is a book about mothers and daughters and also of sisters. And having grown up in a family of immigrants, I remember just witnessing a lot of tension between my grandmother and mother. If you ever meet them, don't tell them that I'm telling you this. But as I grew older, like I started to understand more that they just had very different backgrounds. Like my mom grew up completely in the U.S., whereas my grandmother had come from China and like survived the war and then had to live with her father's concubine. Just like all these unspoken burdens that she held, I think really affected how she treated my mom and raised her. And so I just felt like as I grew up and as I became a writer and started to reflect on this more, like I just started to think more a lot about the immigrant experience and what it is like to have this relationship between mothers and daughters, which actually I think is very universal, like whether or not you're an immigrant, it's just to have these like misunderstandings and like these different ways of showing love. And so that I think really shaped how I created the characters in this book, and is something that brought comfort to me as I was writing it. All right?
Yeah, so what I'll say about this book is that it deals a lot in resilience, and I think it's really important when I write to young people, Black boys especially, to show them that I understand everything that the world throws at them, and that there is something on the other side of that. I think as young people especially, we think that like the things that we're going through, like at the moment that we're going through them, are going to be forever. And as an adult who has been through depression and kind of like the various challenges that come with being a young Black man in this country, just learning how to kind of cope with that and carve out a life of happiness in spite of all of the outside things, I think is what I want to give Black boys. So what the book really deals with is the school to prison pipeline, and it kind of shows how even though Nick tries everything that he can to excel in academia and inside of the institutions that are set up for in this country for him to quote unquote succeed, he's still pushed into like the street life kind of, and that's why he gets involved with bootleggers and a heist. And it just shows that, you know, even though the structure of the society might not support you, you can still find community and hope in those impossible circumstances. So that's just what I want to give to you.
And in each of your books, how do you feel the personal relationships between the characters and whoever it may be that they're dealing with, you know, a struggle with family or friends or just identity? How do you feel that redefines and kind of leads your characters to a certain point in your book? And also, when you were writing these books, were you planning to do this, or was it like you kept writing the book and there it went? You know, like the character just went in one direction or another. I know when I write, sometimes that happens. So how do you feel those struggles kind of shaped your characters in the book?
I think for me, my story starts as a revenge story because it's like there's a sect of like, what if all the fairy tale bad girls were all once part of like the same sect and they got persecuted? So it's the girl that is left behind. She thinks her friends and her family are dead, so she's out for revenge. She's decided to kill the queen who killed her family and kill her son because she thought that would hurt the queen. So I think I start in a place of revenge, but she meets the boy and he happens to be cute and he happens to be nice, and she starts to think about things a little differently. And it's not just because there's a boy, it's because maybe you can't, you know, kill someone who's innocent to save the world, basically. So yeah, so I think that for me the journey was like one of letting go of the pain and embracing something else, and also trying to figure out how to save people without completely sacrificing yourself. Because I think there's the heroes often have to, you know, lose everything to save the world, but I wanted her to be crafty and try to find a way where she survives.
Kalynn?
So in Making a Monster, the primary kind of relationships that Mika has are with her boyfriend Noah and her parents. She's very close to her mom, She loves her dad, but they have kind of an awkward, kind of distant relationship. And so, you know, she loses people that are close to her, and then she has this ability to bring people back from the dead. But the kind of catch is that when you bring them back, they have to kind of maintain. Anybody seen Death Becomes Her?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's very Death Becomes Her-esque. They have to maintain this body that they're in, and that means, and it works out for Mika because they're a family of morticians, so they have all the tools to do that. But when Noah dies and she brings him back, you know, he's in this body and he's trying to figure out how to maintain himself, and so the conflict is, you know, Mika loves these people that are close to her that she loses, and she wants them in her life and she wants to bring them back, but it's not necessarily what's best for them. They struggle and there's pain and there's suffering, and it's kind of like those relationships about how much she loves these people. You know, do you love them enough to let them go? That is kind of the driving force behind everything that happens in the story. And I just think that I think it's a fascinating kind of take to, you know, as someone in a relationship, and, you know, as a mom, and just you think about these people that you love so much, and you do anything to keep them with you and to have them close to you, but at what cost, you know, to them. And so those relationships drive the story. You know, it is an exploration of grief. It's an exploration of forgiveness, and it really is about, in the end, learning to be selfless, which can be a really hard thing to do with the people that you love.
Elizabeth?
In Fishbone Cinderella, one of the themes of the book is invisibility. So Ying, the main character, early on discovers that she can turn invisible. And in the beginning, she sees this really as a gift because it helps her escape the Japanese when they invade. But later on, as she starts to grow up, it actually becomes like this thorn with her relationships with other people, like especially with her daughter later on in the next generation. Like, she doesn't really tell anybody that she has this ability, but she starts to lose control of it, and she starts disappearing involuntarily. So her daughter notices, and the magic in this book is kind of used as an unspoken metaphor for like this distance between mother and daughter that they have to find a way to overcome.
And Jesmeen? We're right. We're supposed to go first.
So yeah, I think that like relationships are a huge part of like your identity. Not to quote Batman Begins, but it's like not who you are on the inside, but what you do that defines you, right? So I think a lot of the time, and I think most people can relate to this, you often have an idea in your head of like the kind of person that you might be friends with or you might want to date, especially like as a young person kind of entering that game. And you might venture into like the dating market, or venture into friendships and find that the kind of people that you actually sort of vibe with and like resonate with, they may not be the kinds of people that you imagine yourself resonating with. And so I think that kind of conflict forces you, and forces the characters in my book as well, to kind of confront sort of what they really have as their own preferences versus what they think are their preferences based on how other people view them, how society looks at them, what their families think of them, what their communities might think of who would be best, for you to be with, etc. And so I think that's like a really interesting avenue in which to explore character. We all kind of judge each other by like, oh, like this person's friends with this person. Now like, it's a little bit sketchy, right? Like of course it's always going to be like a big part of your identity. And so the main characters of this book, certainly there's a lot of like shifting friendships and relationships. As especially Simran, the main character, has to kind of decide, she can't maintain every relationship in her life, and she does end up having to let go of some of it. And it's a really heavy sort of journey to have to take.
So for Nick in The Great Disillusionment of Nick and Jay, a lot of the relationships that he forms, not just in Harlem, but in his hometown, are with people who are trying to push him to be more competent and to kind of own his sovereignty and his agency. So I think that's a pivotal difference between Nick Carraway from the original and Nick Carrington from this book, is that this Nick becomes a lot more active in the plot and in charting his own destiny. So I think that, you know, from his love interest to his cousin Daisy to the mentors in his life, they're pretty much trying to get him to stop being such a dewdropper, which is 20s slang for someone who's really listless and kind of like isn't steering their own life and is just letting things happen to them. So I think a big part of the relationships that he forms in this book are just people trying to get him to step into who he really is and not letting the world happen to him, but like making his mark on the world and being really present in his body and owning his truth. So that's where relationships come into play, I think, most poignantly in the book.
I want to use dewdropper. I love that
So
much.
Yes. Adding it to the Okay, so it's time for kind of a fun, chill question. I like this one. So if you could retell a classic story that has not been adapted, which would you choose? I know, kind of basic question, but I want to know. If there's something, it can be anything, fairy tale, anything, movie, anything, what would you want to try to change up a bit and create something like this? That has not been done. Oh, that's wrong.
That's not been done?
No, listen, no.
I want to do a Shakespeare maybe. I have an idea. I want to, there's not a lot left for me, honestly. But
That would be cool though.
yeah, but a Robin Hood would be fun. I have a Peter Pan. No one loves Peter Pan as much as I want them to. I read the first 5 chapters that I actually went on sub with the Peter Pan and ended up with a Snow Queen book. So, but I still love those chapters. So maybe that.
That'd be fun.
I really want to do Pinocchio, but I want to do it as a horror. And if you read the song, if you know the story, it literally is a scary story. Yes.
I know. Now, let's see. Oh, yeah, just then.
I can't think of one that hasn't been adapted, but I really want to do like an Anne of Green Gables retelling, and similar to you, Kalynn, I think I would want to do it in like a different genre and just put like a total twist on it. Like, I'm Canadian, grew up with Anne, really resonate with her as a character. Would love to put her in a situation that is not PEI.
I love that.
I think I've done most of my favorite fairy tales. I did like Wild Swans, Beauty and the Beast, but if I could still pick maybe Rapunzel, maybe Little Women, or maybe like an opera, because I have a music background. But a lot of those are tragic, but that's okay.
That's fine. I like drama.
My brain keeps wanting to go like further back in time than where I am, but I keep going to Robin, Batman's sidekick.
Okay, yes, all of these.
Robin origin story, just about like, you know, his time in the circus, losing his parents. That's something that my mind goes to a lot.
I love that.
Ideas then. That's not good. That's amazing. I love those. And now before we give the 15 minutes that you guys deserve to ask questions, can you tell us what's next? That you can share. If you can share what's next for you, what might you be working on, what do you want to work on, what is it or what will it be?
I don't have anything that I can share. Sorry.
Okay. It's fine.
So I have a graphic novel coming out next month. It is called A Lost Revenge. It is a Descendants novel for Disney. It has Uma
Did you
as
say
the main
Descendants?
character. Yes.
Okay.
And I have a copy in my bag.
Oh,
If you,
stop.
yeah, for you.
I'm going to that show with the zombies and Camp Rock and Descendants.
Yeah.
I'm so excited. Thank you. I'm so excited.
I also have a young adult kind of mystery horror that is coming out in September. It's called Tell the Ghosts I'm Gone. And then next year I have my adult debut, which is a horror novel called Oil on Canvas. And it's kind of a Dorian Gray rethinking. Yeah.
So excited for you. I want to read everything. I've been busy writing for soap this year, so I haven't written as much on the book side. But I have a new Oz book, and I'm on submission with it right now. So hopefully in the next, year, you will see that, but I'm excited about it.
Me too.
My next YA I can talk about. It is another romantic drama. It is not a retelling in any way, shape, or form, but it is about a girl who's embroiled in an academic corruption scheme at her university. So it's a little bit like crossover. And she is basically racing to stop a fellow student from uncovering that corruption. And of course, there starts to be feelings along the way, which is a conflict of interest when you're trying to stop someone from ripping apart your fake academic life. Well, it's not a retelling, but it is definitely inspired by some real life events. Institutional corruption is, something very prevalent in our society, to put it lightly. And it's also inspired by the, I think, 2023 Stanford scandal, when the president of the university had to step down because a freshman journalist exposed like a huge academic research scandal. So, it's fun.
My next book comes out September 29th. It's called Night of Madness. It's a YA horror novel that is loosely based on Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. And it follows a girl who gets a golden ticket to go to basically a reality TV show set where it's kind of like Fear Factor, like they're pushing them to face these challenges, but it's very like Funhouse style, like Willy Wonka. So they're going through these tournament style games, and then they realize that the game runner is actually a psychopath who is trapping them inside and basically disposing of them one by one. So it comes out through Seven Poles, September 29th.
Nice.
It's called Night of Madness.
I love that. The Taking of Jack Livingston is one of my favorite books. So, give me all the horror. Okay, so as promised, 11:45. Yes, 15 minutes of questions for you guys. Raise your hand and I will call on you. There you go. Right there.
Was it hard to break away from the classic story that has been ingrained in readers like throughout their childhood and kind of make it your own?
I didn't really find it difficult to do. I did find it difficult for readers to accept sometimes, though. I think that's kind of where I saw a lot of pushback. It's like, oh, this story is supposed to be this way, and this is how it's supposed to go, when it doesn't, I didn't write it that way, so there's a little bit of pushback there. But I find it really fun, and I was going to say easy, but that's not the right word. But I find it fun to work within the existing framework, to make it something different, which is like, it seems counterintuitive, but it's fun. It's fun to do. Yeah.
I think like whenever you're writing, there's like a moment when it becomes yours. Like for me with Dorothy, I saw a little goth munchkin on my head, and it's like, okay, oh, that's it, that's my world. And from there, I just kind of ran with it, and I love the idea of like just exploring what happens to these characters that never had power, that now have power, and what will they do with it, and what if they just kind of overcorrect. And that was like the heart of Dorothy for me. And the night before the book came out, someone was talking to me, and they asked me like, well, are you worried about how people are gonna receive this book because you made this very beloved character into a big witch? And and I said, oh, I really hadn't thought of that. I guess I'm okay, And luckily I was greeted with so much love for this book, and it changed my life, and I'm glad I did it. But when I was writing, it was completely, it was little girl in me who wanted to know and wanted a further story, and that's what I was doing.
Anybody else, or do it? Another question? Anybody? Okay, I see right there.
Kind of bouncing off of that, I just wanted to know that when you're doing kind of a readaptation, how do you decide how much of the original story or what elements to keep and how much to reinvent, so as to keep things interesting but also kind of give readers something to latch on, especially when you're kind of transitioning from like a specific like time, place, culture, and something that's completely different?
I just think that there's like certain touchstones that you wouldn't write it without. Like if you're doing Cinderella, you're gonna have a ball probably, or the shoe, or the fairy godmother, like one of those things, or the bones. Like there has to be some of the things that make the story what it was, or you won't recognize it. And say for Wizard of Oz, like same shoes, with certain characters, certain things that you just feel like you couldn't tell the story without, and I think you have to figure out for yourself what those things are.
I think that's part of like the beauty of retelling is that you can actually pick what those touch things are, right? Like you can decide to focus on an aspect or a character that the original hasn't really focused on before, and that way you also give the audience an opportunity to explore themes of that story that maybe weren't closely examined before. So in a way, like you're able to get to know the original work even better because you are examining it through a completely different perspective.
Going off what something Jasmine mentioned earlier about like something that you weren't satisfied with in a fairy tale. One of my YA novels, Six Crimson Cranes, the reason I wanted to write it was because I was always unsatisfied with the Wicked Queen character in the fairy tale. There was just a sentence in the fairy tale saying, oh, the queen, she was jealous of how much time the royal children were spending with the king, so she turned them into swans. And I was like, why? Like, that's so petty. You know, I need more of a backstory for this. And that became like part of the reason that I explored her character a lot more in my book.
Any other questions back here? Let's see. Yes, no? Ready for books to be signed? Okay, so any other questions, or shall we get you guys going and I will tell you exactly where to go for the signing? Are you guys ready? Okay, so for the signing, I have it here. You guys are going to go right now, so you can make sure to make a line, just have a line, and we will bring them over soon. So the signing is going to be at the author autographing table 32. It's a big hall. It is a hall 1A and B, and it is table 32. So start heading over there, and I promise you we will bring them over soon. Thank you so much for